The demolition crew's sledgehammers crashed into the concrete as Karen's screams pierced the morning air. "You can't destroy community property," she shrieked, her face twisted with rage as she jabbed her finger at the gaping hole where David's pool once sparkled. The police sirens wailed closer, but what Karen didn't know was that David had been recording everything, and the footage would expose a secret that would shatter their entire neighborhood forever. David Morrison stood in his backyard at 6 a.m., coffee steam rising from his mug as he watched the excavator's steel teeth bite into the concrete surrounding his pool. Each crunch of demolition felt like a weight lifting from his shoulders. 8 months of legal battles, sleepless nights, and mounting debts finally coming to an end. Beautiful morning for destruction, isn't it? The voice made him turn. His neighbor, Janet, leaned against the chain-link fence separating their properties, her gray hair still in curlers but her eyes bright with satisfaction. 23 years I've lived here," David said, taking another sip of coffee. "Never thought I'd be this happy to see something I built get torn down. After what that woman put you through, I'd be dancing on the rubble." David managed a tired smile. Karen Pemberton had made his life hell for the past year and a half, ever since she'd moved into the house directly behind his. What started as complaints about pool parties he'd never even had escalated into noise violations, property line disputes, and ultimately a lawsuit claiming his pool violated neighborhood covenants that didn't exist. The excavator operator, a weathered man named Rico, shut off the engine and climbed down. "We're making good progress. Mr. Morrison should have the concrete broken up by noon, filled in by tomorrow evening." "Perfect." David pulled out an envelope from his jacket. "Here's the final payment, plus the bonus we discussed." Rico grinned, pocketing the cash. "Pleasure doing business. And between you and me, I've torn down a lot of pools, but I've never seen someone look this relieved about it. You have no idea." The sound of a screen door slamming echoed across the neighborhood, followed by the rapid click of heels on pavement. David's stomach tightened. He knew that sound. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Karen Pemberton emerged from the gap between houses like a fury unleashed, her perfectly styled blonde hair bouncing with each aggressive step. Even at 6:15 a.m., she was fully dressed in her real estate blazer and heels, her face flushed with indignation. "Good morning, Karen," David said evenly. "I'm removing my pool. You can't do that." She marched straight up to the fence, her manicured nails gripping the metal links. "That pool is community property. It adds value to the entire neighborhood." Janet snorted. "Community property? Karen, it's in his backyard. Stay out of this, Janet." Karen's voice cracked with hysteria. "David, I'm warning you, stop this immediately or I'll call the police." David set down his coffee mug with deliberate calm. "The pool is on my property, built with my money, maintained by me for over 2 decades. I have every legal right to remove it. Legal right." Karen's laugh was shrill. "What about moral obligation? What about property values? What about the children in this neighborhood who deserve access to recreational facilities? Your kids are in college, Karen." "That's not the point." She fumbled for her phone. "I'm calling the authorities. This is destruction of community assets." Rico climbed back into the excavator, shaking his head. "Lady's got a screw loose," he muttered to David. Karen's voice rose to a shriek as she dialed, "Yes, 911. I need police immediately. My neighbor is destroying community property without permits." David pulled out his own phone and began recording. He'd learned to document everything where Karen was concerned. "Ma'am, this is David Morrison at 1247 Maple Street. I'm having my personal pool removed from my private property with all proper permits. The woman calling is Karen Pemberton, who's been harassing me for 18 months. Karen whirled around, her face purple with rage. "Harassing, harassing. You're the one who's been torturing this neighborhood with your selfish destruction." "Karen," David said quietly, still recording, "show me one document, one single piece of paper that proves this pool belongs to anyone but me. Need documents. I have community standards. I have moral authority." Janet leaned forward, fascinated. "Moral authority from where? Exactly." From being a responsible homeowner who cares about property values and community welfare, Karen spun back to David. "You bought that house, knowing the pool was a neighborhood asset. People moved here because of that pool. Name one person." That's not everyone knows. Name one person, Karen, who moved to this street because of my pool." The excavator roared back to life, drowning out Karen's sputtering response. She pressed her phone closer to her ear, shouting over the noise. "They're here. The police are coming. You're going to jail for this, David Morrison." David continued recording as Karen paced back and forth behind his fence like a caged animal. In the 18 months since she'd moved in, she'd filed 17 complaints with the city, 3 lawsuits, all dismissed, and made his life a living nightmare. The pool had become her obsession, her symbol of everything wrong with his existence. The first lawsuit claimed the pool violated HOA regulations. There was no HOA. The second claimed it was too close to the property line. It wasn't. The third claimed it was a public nuisance. The judge had laughed that one out of court, but Karen never stopped. She organized neighborhood meetings that no one attended. She started a petition that no one signed. She demanded the city was told to stop wasting their time. The final straw had come 3 months ago when David found her in his backyard at midnight, supposedly checking for permit violations. The trespassing charge was still pending. "You know what this is really about?" Janet said quietly, moving closer to the fence. David nodded grimly. "Control." Karen couldn't control him, couldn't intimidate him, couldn't force him to bend to her will. The pool had become her battlefield, and she was losing. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. "Here we go," David murmured, checking his phone's battery life. Rico paused the excavator again. "Want me to keep working?" "Absolutely. You have every right to be here." Karen rushed toward the street as 2 patrol cars pulled up. David watched her animated gesticulating, her theatrical, pointing her obvious distress. She was performing, he realized. This wasn't about the pool, it was about creating a scene, about forcing him into submission through public embarrassment. Officer Rodriguez, whom David had dealt with before during Karen's previous complaints, approached with a weary expression. "Mr. Morrison, Miss Pemberton says, you're destroying community property." David handed over his phone, the recording still running. "She's been saying a lot of things for 18 months. Officer Rodriguez, here are my permits, my property surveys, and documentation of every previous complaint she's filed." Rodriguez flipped through the paperwork with practiced efficiency. "Everything looks in order. The pool's clearly on your property, but it serves the community." Karen shrieked from behind him. "It's been here for decades. People have a right, ma'am." Rodriguez turned to face her. "No one has a right to someone else's private property." David almost felt sorry for her. In that moment, almost Karen's face crumpled with the realization that her moral authority meant nothing, that her sense of entitlement had no legal foundation. But then her expression hardened, transforming into something cold and calculating. "Fine," she said quietly. "If that's how you want to play this game, David, then game on." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking ominously on the pavement. Officer Rodriguez shook his head. Some people just can't let things go. As the police cars drove away and the excavator resumed its work, David felt a chill despite the morning sun. Karen's parting words carried a promise of escalation that made his stomach clench. He was right to be worried. By evening, every house on the street had received an anonymous letter detailing David's antisocial destruction of community assets and calling for neighborhood action to preserve property values and community standards. The war for Maple Street had officially begun. David woke to the sound of his doorbell ringing at 7 a.m. sharp. Through the peephole, he saw Mrs. Chen from 3 houses down, clutching a piece of paper and looking deeply uncomfortable. "I'm sorry to bother you so early," she said when he opened the door, "but I thought you should see this." The letter was printed on expensive cream-colored paper, unsigned but clearly from Karen. David's jaw tightened as he read the carefully crafted poison. "Dear concerned neighbors, as property owners, on Maple Street, we share a responsibility to maintain the values that make our community desirable. Unfortunately, one resident has chosen to destroy a recreational amenity that has served our neighborhood for over 20 years. This selfish act of demolition threatens all our property values and sets a dangerous precedent for future community destruction. I urge you to consider what message we send when we allow such antisocial behavior to go unchallenged. Our silence is our consent. Sincerely, a fellow homeowner." She put this in everyone's mailbox, Mrs. Chen said quietly. David, I've lived here for 15 years. That pool was always yours. We all knew that. Thank you for bringing this to me. Mrs. Chen hesitated. There's more. She's called for a neighborhood meeting tonight, 7 o'clock at the community center. David's phone buzzed with a text from Janet. Check your front yard. He stepped outside to find a handmade sign staked into his lawn. Stop the destruction. Save our community assets. Karen stood across the street, arms crossed, watching his reaction with satisfaction. Morning, David, she called cheerfully. Hope you don't mind the sign. Public property, public message. The sign wasn't on public property, was clearly on his lawn. David pulled out his phone and started recording as he walked toward it. Karen, this is my private property. Remove the sign. Actually, she said, consulting a folder thick with papers, according to city ordinance 247.3, the first 6 feet from the curb is considered public right-of-way for utility access. David measured the distance. The sign was 8 feet from the curb, firmly on his property. Nice try. Move it. I don't think so. Karen's smile was predatory. See, I've done my research. I know my rights. Unlike some people who think they can just destroy community assets without consequences. David yanked the sign out of the ground and walked it over to her. Here's your sign. Next time you want to put something on my property, ask permission. You can't silence the voice of community concern. David, people have a right to know what kind of neighbor you really are. And what kind is that? The kind who destroys 20 years of shared joy because he can't handle a little feedback. About his antisocial behavior, David's recording captured the entire exchange, including Karen's admission that she'd deliberately placed the sign on his property. He was learning to document everything. By noon, 3 more neighbors had come, to apologize for the letter and assure him of their support. But David noticed others crossing the street to avoid him, their expressions uncomfortable. Karen's poison was working. The real surprise came at 3 p.m. when a black sedan pulled into his driveway. The woman who emerged wore a crisp business suit and carried a briefcase that screamed lawyer, Mr. Morrison. I'm Patricia Walsh from Pemberton and Associates. I represent concerned members of your neighborhood community. David's blood chilled. Pemberton and Associates. That's correct. The pieces clicked into place. Karen wasn't just an entitled neighbor. She was a lawyer, a real estate lawyer who specialized in property disputes. She'd been playing a much deeper game than he'd realized. Ms. Walsh, I have all proper permits for the pool removal. Everything's been approved by the city. I'm sure it has been. However, my client has identified several potential issues that warrant investigation. She handed him a thick document. This is notice of our intent to file an injunction to halt all demolition activities pending review of community impact assessments, environmental studies, and historical preservation considerations. David scanned the legal jargon, his heart sinking. Historical preservation. It's a pool, not the Alamo. Any structure over 20 years old in this county requires historical review before demolition. My client has also identified potential environmental concerns regarding concrete dust, chemical runoff, and disruption to local water tables. The city already approved. City approval doesn't supersede state environmental regulations or federal historical preservation acts. Walsh's smile was as sharp as her client's. Mr. Morrison, I strongly advise you to cease all demolition activities immediately. Continued work in violation of these pending reviews could result in substantial fines and criminal charges. After she left, David sat in his kitchen staring at the legal papers. Karen had played him perfectly. While he'd been focused on permits and property rights, she'd been researching every possible angle to stop him. The anonymous letter, the neighborhood meeting, the fake Signal diversions while she prepared her real attack. Rico called at 4 p.m. Mr. Morrison. I got some lady lawyer calling me about environmental violations and historical reviews. Says if I keep working, I could lose my contractor's license. Rico, we have all the proper permits. Maybe so, but I can't risk my business on a maybe. I'm sorry, but I got to shut down until this gets sorted. David watched from his window as Rico loaded his equipment onto the trailer. The pool sat half demolished, a concrete crater filled with murky water and broken dreams. At 6:30 p.m., cars began arriving at the community center. David counted 23 vehicles, nearly every household on the street. Karen had mobilized the entire neighborhood, Janet knocked on his door at 6:45. "You coming to the meeting?" "I wasn't invited." "Honey, this whole thing is about you. You better be there to defend yourself." The community center buzzed with nervous energy as David entered. Karen stood at the front, now dressed in a sharp business suit, her lawyer persona on full display. Charts and graphs covered an easel. Beside her, "As I was saying," she continued, clearly having started early, "the unilateral destruction of established community amenities sets a dangerous precedent. Today, it's a pool. Tomorrow, it could be the oak trees. Next week, someone decides the playground. Equipment is too old." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Furthermore, Karen clicked to a new chart. Preliminary analysis suggests that removing the pool could decrease property values by 8 to 12% across our entire neighborhood. That represents a collective loss of approximately $240,000 in home equity. Mrs. Patterson from the corner house raised her hand. "But Karen, it's David's pool. He's been maintaining it for 20 years. The question isn't ownership, Margaret. The question is responsibility. When you live in a community, you have obligations that extend beyond legal technicalities." David stood up. "May I respond?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. "I've lived here for 23 years, he began. "I've maintained that pool with my own money, my own time, my own effort. I've never charged anyone to use it, never asked for contributions, never demanded help with upkeep. It's cost me thousands of dollars and countless hours." "No one forced you to do that," Karen interrupted. "You're right. No one forced me. Just like no one can force me to keep it." Actually, Karen's smile was triumphant. "That's where you're wrong." She gestured to her lawyer, who stood and addressed the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, my research has uncovered something very interesting. This neighborhood was originally developed with what's called an implied community covenant. While there's no formal HOA, the original development plans from 1987 included shared recreational facilities as part of the community design." David's stomach dropped. The pool in question was built according to these original specifications and has served the community for over 20 years. Under property law, this establishes what we call community easement by prescription. In simple terms, the community has acquired legal rights to the continued existence of this facility. The room erupted in excited chatter. Karen's expression was pure vindication. "Furthermore," Walsh continued, "Mr. Morrison's demolition violates multiple statutes have already outlined. We will be filing for an immediate restraining order tomorrow morning." David felt the walls closing in. Every neighbor avoided his eyes except Janet, who looked as stunned as he felt. "The bottom line," Karen said, reclaiming center stage, "is that David Morrison does not have the right to destroy community property regardless of where the property lines are drawn. This pool belongs to all of us, and all of us have a say in its future." Applause filled the room. As the meeting broke up, David found himself surrounded by neighbors who'd seemed supportive just hours earlier. "David, I'm sorry, Mrs. Chen," whispered, "but if it really affects our property values, ... maybe you could just repair it instead of removing it," suggested Mr. Rodriguez. "We could help with maintenance costs," offered the Johnsons. David walked home alone, the weight of the neighborhood's expectations crushing down on him. Karen had turned his private property decision into a community referendum, and he was losing badly. But as he reached his front door, he noticed something that made him pause. Karen's car was parked outside her house, but there was another car in her driveway, a familiar black sedan. David spent the night researching everything he could find about legal ethics, conflict of interest, and something called barratry, the criminal offense of persistently filing frivolous lawsuits. By 3 a.m., armed with screenshots and a growing file of evidence, he had a plan. The first call went to the State Bar Association's ethics hotline at 8 a.m. sharp. A lawyer is manufacturing legal claims against her neighbor using her own law firm. "Can you be more specific about the misconduct?" Karen Pemberton of Pemberton & Associates is using frivolous legal claims to harass me personally. 18 months ago, and has filed multiple baseless lawsuits. Now she's representing herself through her own firm in what appears to be a manufactured case. David smiled. "I have 18 months of documentation. Police reports dismissed lawsuits, recordings of her admitting to harassment, and evidence that she's invented legal theories to stop my legitimate property modifications. The intake officer's tone sharpened with interest. Reference case number E4472. The second call went to Rico at 8:15. Rico, I need you back here this afternoon. Bring your biggest excavator. Mr. Morrison, I told you, I can't risk the legal threats are fraudulent. I'm sending you documentation from the State Bar showing that Karen Pemberton is under investigation for manufacturing frivolous claims. You're protected. You sure about this? Absolutely. And Rico, I'm doubling your bonus if you can finish this job today. The third call was to Channel 7 News. I have a story about a lawyer who's using fake legal claims to steal her neighbor's property, David told the assignment editor. It involves manufactured community covenants, frivolous lawsuits, and potential criminal barratry. Appears to be extortion. Patricia Walsh stood on his doorstep, but her confident demeanor from yesterday had vanished. Mr. Morrison, I need to discuss some developments regarding your case. Ms. Walsh, before you say anything, I should mention that I've reported both you and Karen Pemberton to the State Bar for manufacturing frivolous legal claims. Her face went white. I beg your pardon. You claimed yesterday that this neighborhood has implied. You also claimed federal historical preservation requirements for a residential pool. The National Register confirmed no such requirements exist for structures under 50 years old. Walsh's briefcase trembled in her hands. Mr. Morrison, I think there may have been some misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding. You and your client manufactured false legal claims to stop legitimate construction on my private property. That's called barratry, and it's a criminal offense. I was operating on information provided by my client, your client who happens to be your romantic partner, based on the intimate dinner I recorded through her kitchen window last night. Walsh's composure cracked completely. That has nothing to do with Ms. Walsh. Are you familiar with Rule 1.7 of the Professional Conduct Rules? The one about conflicts of interest, when personal relationships affect professional judgment. She turned and fled to her car without another word. David had decided that if Karen wanted to play hardball, he'd finish this job in one day. You're in violation of a pending injunction. What injunction? David called back. The one based on your fraudulent legal claims. Don't you dare. Her words were drowned out by the roar of heavy machinery as Rico's crew attacked the remaining concrete with renewed vigor. David had positioned himself strategically to capture everything on video. The police arrived within minutes, but this time Officer Rodriguez brought a supervisor. Mr. Morrison, Sergeant Thompson said, reviewing David's paperwork, we've received multiple reports about this situation. Can you walk me through what's happening here? David handed over a thick folder. Sergeant, this is documentation showing that Karen Pemberton is a real estate attorney who has been manufacturing false legal claims to harass me for 18 months. The State Bar opened an investigation this morning. Every legal threat she's made is fraudulent. These are some serious allegations. They're also well documented. Officer Rodriguez can confirm that Ms. Pemberton has filed 17 false complaints over 18 months, all dismissed or withdrawn. Rodriguez nodded grimly. She's been a frequent caller. Karen stormed over her face, purple with rage. Sergeant, this man is violating multiple court orders and environmental regulations. Ma'am, what court orders specifically? The injunction we filed. I don't see any active court orders in our system, ma'am, but my lawyer said, your lawyer, who's under investigation for manufacturing frivolous claims, David interjected. Thompson's radio crackled. After a brief conversation, he turned back to Karen with a stern expression. Ms. Pemberton, I need to advise you that we've received a complaint about fraudulent legal threats. You have the right to remain silent. What? You can't arrest me. I'm the victim here, ma'am. Filing false legal claims and making fraudulent threats regarding court orders is a criminal offense. As Thompson read Karen her rights, David noticed cars pulling up. Mrs. Chen Johnson's, Mr. Rodriguez, and a dozen other neighbors emerged to witness Karen's public meltdown. This is insane, Karen shrieked as Thompson guided her toward his patrol car. I'm a licensed attorney. I know my rights. That pool is community property. Ma'am, there are no community property rights to a privately owned pool on private property. The Channel 7 news van arrived just as Karen was being placed in the back seat, her perfectly styled hair disheveled and her business suit wrinkled from struggling against the handcuffs. Reporter Amanda Chen thrust a microphone toward David. "Mr. Morrison, can you tell us what led to your neighbor's arrest?" "Karen Pemberton moved here 18 months ago and immediately began harassing me about my pool. When normal complaints didn't work, she used her position as a real estate attorney to manufacture fake legal claims, fraudulent court orders, and non-existent community covenants to try to stop me from modifying my own property." "How did you discover these claims were false?" "I did what she apparently didn't think I was smart enough to do. I researched the actual law instead of just accepting her word." Amanda turned to the gathering crowd of neighbors. "Mrs. Chen, what's your reaction to these developments?" Mrs. Chen looked embarrassed. "I feel terrible. We all believed Karen because she sounded so official, so legal. We should have known better. David's been a wonderful neighbor for over 20 years. One by one, the neighbors who had turned against him at last night's meeting approached to apologize. The Johnsons brought him a casserole. Mr. Rodriguez offered to help with the cleanup. Mrs. Patterson actually hugged him. "I'm so sorry, David," she said tearfully. "She made it sound like you were stealing money from our pockets." That's exactly what she wanted you to think. As the news crew filmed the demolition work resuming, David noticed Patricia Walsh's black sedan speeding away from Karen's house, suitcases visible in the back seat. By 6 p.m., Rico's crew had broken up the remaining concrete and begun filling the hole. The pool that had defined David's property for over 20 years was finally disappearing. Janet appeared at his fence with 2 beers and a satisfied grin. "So what happens to Karen now?" "Her law license is under review, and she'll probably need a new lawyer. Since Patricia Walsh seems to have abandoned ship, good riddance." Janet raised her beer. To the end of an era. David touched his bottle to hers, but his expression remained thoughtful. "You know what the crazy thing is? If she'd just been a normal neighbor, if she'd asked politely or offered to help maintain it, I might have kept the pool. I was only removing it because I couldn't afford the upkeep anymore, but she couldn't just be normal, could she? She had to try to control you. And that," David said, watching the concrete truck pour its load into the hole where his pool used to be, "was her biggest mistake." As the sun set over Maple Street, David stood in his backyard, feeling truly peaceful for the first time in 18 months. The war was over, and justice had finally been served. But as he headed inside, he noticed a familiar car driving slowly past his house. Karen's sister Michelle, whom he'd met briefly at a neighborhood barbecue years ago, she pulled into the driveway and began unloading suitcases from her trunk. David's sense of peace evaporated as he realized the nightmare might not be over yet. Michelle Pemberton stood in Karen's driveway at 7 a.m. the next morning, arms crossed, staring directly at David's bedroom window. Unlike Karen's polished real estate professional look, Michelle had the weathered appearance of someone who worked, with her hands paint-stained jeans, steel-toed boots, and an expression that suggested she'd seen plenty of fights. David watched from behind his curtain as she unloaded boxes labeled legal files and evidence. His stomach sank. Whatever Karen had been planning, she'd apparently shared it with her sister. The doorbell rang at 7:15. "Mr. Morrison." "I'm Michelle Pemberton, Karen's sister." Her voice was calmer than Karen's, but carried an undertone of barely controlled anger. "I think we need to talk about what? About the fact that you destroyed my sister's life over a goddamn swimming pool." David opened the door, but kept the chain latched. "Your sister destroyed her own life by filing false legal claims and harassing me for 18 months. See, that's where you're wrong." Michelle held up a thick manila folder. Karen wasn't lying about those community covenants. She just couldn't prove them because the original documents were sealed in probate court. "What are you talking about?" "The previous owner of your house, Harold Jameson, died intestate in 1987. His estate included specific provisions about community, recreational, facilities that were never properly recorded due to a clerical error. Karen found the documentation in the probate archives." David's confidence wavered. "Even if that were true, it is true. And I have the unsealed documents right here." Michelle held up an official-looking paper with court stamps. "Turns out, your pool wasn't just built for your enjoyment." The bottom dropped out of David's world. "That's impossible. I've owned this house for 23 years? No one mentioned it because the estate lawyer who was supposed to file these documents died in a car accident 3 days after Harold's funeral. The paperwork got buried in boxes for 37 years. Michelle's smile was sharp until Karen started digging. David stared at the official documents, his mind racing. Why should I believe anything from Karen's family? Because, unlike my sister, I'm not a lawyer. I'm a licensed private investigator, and everything I find has to hold up in court. Michelle handed him a business card. Pemberton Investigations. I specialize in property disputes and title research. I want you to understand that Karen wasn't some crazy neighbor. Lady, she was trying to protect a legal obligation that you've been violating for over 2 decades. Michelle's voice hardened. And now, because you had her arrested on false charges, she's lost her law license and her career. The charges weren't false. The hell they weren't. Every legal claim Karen made was based on legitimate research. The state bar investigation, they're going to find that she was acting in good faith on valid legal grounds. Michelle stepped closer, but you couldn't wait for due process, could you? You had to destroy her reputation, her career, her entire life. David's phone buzzed with a text from Rico. Mr. Morrison, got a problem. City inspector says the fill work might need to be undone. Something about estate obligations. You file a complaint with the city, David said, his heart sinking. And unlike Karen's polite requests for compliance, I'm not asking nicely. Michelle's voice turned ice cold. You're going to rebuild that pool, Mr. Morrison. Every inch of it. And you're going to apologize to my sister publicly. Like hell I am. Then you're going to lose this house. Michelle pulled out another document. This is a lien notice. The estate obligations you've been violating carry a penalty of $50,000, plus interest. David grabbed the paper, scanning the legal jargon frantically. Who are the heirs? Michelle's smile was predatory. Funny story about that. Harold never married, had no kids. His estate was supposed to go to charity, but the charity dissolved. In 1994, under intestate succession law, unclaimed estates eventually transferred to, well, let's just say I've done my research on estate law too. You're saying you own. I'm saying the Pemberton family has acquired legal standing to enforce Harold Jameson's estate obligations, and that pool was a legally binding obligation that you've been in violation of for 23 years. David's mind reeled. Every move he'd made to fight Karen had somehow strengthened her family's position. The recordings, the state bar complaint, the public humiliation, all of it could be reframed as harassment of someone acting on legitimate legal grounds. This is extortion. This is justice. You want to play legal hardball? Let's play. Michelle headed back toward her car. You have 72 hours to begin pool reconstruction. After that, we file for immediate seizure of the property to satisfy the estate debt. As Michelle drove away, David slumped against his doorframe. Janet appeared at the fence, her face concerned. David, what was that about? He handed her the documents with trembling hands. I think I just lost my house. Janet scanned the papers, her expression growing increasingly grave. Jesus, David, this looks real. How is that possible? How could I own a house for 23 years and not know about estate obligations? Title insurance should have caught this, unless it was never properly recorded in the first place. David's voice was hollow. Michelle said the estate lawyer died before filing the documents. By noon, David had spoken to 3 different lawyers, all of whom gave him the same devastating news. If the estate documents were authentic, he was facing a massive financial liability that could indeed cost him his house. The worst part was that Karen's arrest now looked like persecution of someone who had been legally correct all along. The state bar would likely dismiss their investigation and potentially censure David for filing a false complaint, Rico called. At 2 p.m., City Inspector Red, tagged the whole site, says we need to halt all work pending estate resolution. The concrete trucks work from yesterday was already being... His phone rang. Channel 7 News. Mr. Morrison, this is Amanda Chen. We've received some new information about your neighbor dispute that we'd like to discuss. Are you available for a follow-up interview? What kind of new information? Well, it appears that the woman you had arrested may have been acting on legitimate legal grounds after all. We've been contacted by a private investigator who claims to have documentation proving that your pool removal violated estate covenants dating back to 1987, David closed his eyes. No comment. Mr. Morrison, this is a significant development. If these documents are authentic, it completely changes the narrative of this story. A wrongfully accused woman, a man who destroyed evidence to avoid legal obligations. David hung up and immediately called his lawyer. Frank, it's David Morrison. I need to know. Could this estate obligation thing be real? Frank Kowalski had been practicing property law for 30 years. His silence stretched long enough to make David's chest tight. David, I pulled the probate. Records there's definitely an estate file for Harold Jameson, and it's thick. Real thick. What does that mean? How? Serious? Lucier House? Serious. But David, here's the thing that bothers me. This Michelle Pemberton woman appeared awfully fast with awfully convenient documentation. I want to verify every piece of paper she showed you. You think it might be fake? I think the Pemberton family has shown a remarkable talent for finding exactly the legal ammunition they need, exactly when they need it. That evening, David sat in his kitchen, surrounded by legal papers, trying to figure out how his simple pool removal had turned into a potential loss of everything he owned. A knock at the door interrupted his misery. Through the peephole, he saw Mrs. Chen holding a covered dish. David, I brought you some dinner. You look like you haven't eaten all day. David, there's something I need to tell you. Her voice was hesitant. About Harold Jameson. What about him? I knew Harold. He was my neighbor for 15 years before he died. And David, Harold hated swimming pools. He thought they were a waste of water and a liability nightmare. David stared at her. Are you sure? Absolutely sure. Harold used to complain constantly. About the Hendersons' pool 3 streets over, said it was an attractive nuisance that would get someone killed. Mrs. Chen's eyes were firm with certainty. There is no way that Harold Jameson would have put a legal obligation for a swimming pool into his estate planning. For the first time in hours, David felt a spark of hope. Mrs. Chen, would you be willing to put that in writing? Mrs. Chen's affidavit was just the beginning. Over the next 48 hours, David embarked on the most thorough investigation of his life. Fueled by desperation and growing certainty that the Pemberton sisters were running an elaborate con, his first stop was the county recorder's office, where a helpful clerk named Rosa had worked for 35 years. Harold Jameson. Rosa pulled up the file on her computer. Oh yes, I remember that case. Sad story. The poor man's lawyer, Marcus Webb, died in that car accident right after the funeral. Left a real mess. What kind of mess? Well, Marcus was old school, kept everything on paper, didn't trust computers. When he died, his office was chaos. Boxers everywhere, half-finished documents, incomplete filings. Rosa clicked through several screens. We spent months trying to sort out his active cases. Rosa frowned at her screen. That's odd. Someone requested these exact same records 3 months ago, a woman named Michelle Pemberton. David's pulse quickened. What did you tell her? Same thing I'm telling you. The original estate filing was incomplete, but we do have Marcus Webb's preliminary notes. Rosa pulled out a thick folder. And I can tell you right now, there's nothing in here about swimming pools or community recreation facilities. David photographed every page while Rosa watched sympathetically. Mr. Morrison, between you and me, that Michelle Pemberton woman was very insistent that we must have missed something. Kept asking about supplemental filings and sealed amendments. When I told her, nothing like that existed. She got quite angry. What did she say? That she'd find the documents herself, with or without our help. The pieces were falling into place. Michelle had researched the genuine estate confusion, then fabricated documents to exploit it. David's next stop was the state archives, where death certificates and probate records were stored. The elderly archivist, Mr. Hendricks, was initially reluctant to help until David explained the situation. Young man, are you telling me someone is using forged estate documents to steal your property? That's exactly what I'm telling you. Hendricks' expression hardened. Document fraud is a serious crime. Hendricks examined each page with a magnifying glass, occasionally making disapproving noises. This is very sophisticated work, he finally said. The paper stock is correct for the 1980s. The typeface matches what Marcus Webb's office used. Even the court stamps look authentic. David's heart sank. So they're real. Oh no, they're fake. But they're excellent fakes. Hendricks pointed to several subtle details. See this filing date? October 15th, 1987. Marcus Webb died on October 12th. These documents are supposedly filed 3 days after his death. Maybe someone else in his office. Marcus Webb was a solo practitioner. His office was locked and sealed by the court on October 13th. No one had access to file anything. Hendricks smiled grimly. Whoever created these documents did excellent research, but they made one critical error. They didn't check the exact date of Webb's death. Armed with this evidence, David called Frank Kowalski, who immediately scheduled an emergency meeting. "David, this is bigger than we thought," Frank said, spreading David's research across his conference table. "If they're forging estate documents, they're probably running this scam on multiple properties." "What do you mean?" "Think about it. Michelle researches properties where the original estate lawyer died, identifies filing gaps, then creates fake obligations she can later inherit or enforce. It's brilliant and completely illegal." Frank's assistant knocked and entered. "Mr. Kowalski, that property search you requested came back. You're going to want to see this. The county over the past 2 years all involved recently discovered obligations from estates handled by lawyers who had died decades earlier. She's a serial property scammer," Frank said grimly. "And David, you're not her first victim." At 4 p.m., David's phone rang. The department found some irregularities in the documentation provided by Michelle Pemberton." "What kind of irregularities? The kind that suggest document forgery?" "We've turned our findings over to the district attorney's office." David felt the first real relief he'd experienced in days. "We'd like to record an interview." At the Channel 7 studios, David laid out his evidence while cameras rolled. Mrs. Chen appeared via video link to provide her testimony about Harold Jameson's hatred of swimming pools. The county clerk, Rosa, had agreed to go on record about Michelle's suspicious visit and angry demands for non-existent documents. "This is a story about property fraud," Amanda told her viewers, "where criminals use sophisticated document forgery to steal homes from unsuspecting owners. What looked like a neighbor dispute has revealed an organized scam that may have victimized multiple families." The interview aired at 6 p.m. By 6:30, the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit and 3 other property owners who had faced similar claims from Michelle Pemberton. At 7 p.m., David watched from his window as FBI agents and county sheriff's deputies surrounded Karen's house. Michelle emerged in handcuffs, her confident demeanor replaced by stunned silence. Karen herself was let out moments later, apparently, released from jail just in time to be arrested again for her role in the property fraud scheme. But the biggest surprise came at 7:30 when Patricia Walsh's black sedan was stopped 3 blocks away. The trunk was full of boxers labeled estate documents and property research. Apparently, the entire forgery operation. Frank called at 8 p.m. with the preliminary details. "David, this was a 3-person operation. Karen would move into target neighborhoods to identify vulnerable properties. Michelle would research estate gaps and forge the documents. Patricia would provide legal intimidation and file false claims." "How many houses did they target?" "At least 12 that we know of. They successfully stole 3 properties and collected over $400,000 in fraudulent estate settlements before you stopped them." David sank into his kitchen chair, overwhelmed. "I almost lost my house to these people." "You did more than save your house, David. You exposed a sophisticated criminal operation that was destroying families." The next morning, David woke to the sound of Rico's excavator returning to his driveway. "Mr. Morrison," Rico called cheerfully. City lifted the work stoppage. "Something about fraudulent claims. Anyway, we're here to finish your pool filling." David walked outside to find his entire neighborhood gathered to watch. Mrs. Chen brought coffee. The Johnsons had donuts. Even surly Mr. Rodriguez from the corner house had come to show support. "David," Mrs. Patterson said, "we owe you a huge apology. All of us. You don't owe me anything. The Pembertons were professional criminals. They fooled everyone. But we should have trusted you from the beginning. You've been our neighbor for over 20 years. As Rico's crew finished filling the hole, Janet appeared with a bottle of champagne. "Time for a proper celebration," she announced. To David Morrison, who took down a criminal conspiracy with good old-fashioned research and stubbornness. The neighborhood cheered as David popped the cork. For the first time in 18 months, Maple Street felt like home again. But as he looked around at his celebrating neighbors, David noticed one person conspicuously absent: Harold Jamison's nephew, Robert, who lived 2 towns over and had never shown any interest in his uncle's estate, until this week, when he'd called 3 times asking strange questions about Harold's property arrangements. David made a mental note to call Frank Kowalski first thing Monday morning. Something told him the Pemberton investigation had revealed more than just document fraud, and if Robert Jamison was suddenly interested in his uncle's estate, there might be one more surprise waiting in this saga. The best defense against sophisticated criminals was simple: